Hey, welcome back, everybody, to another installment of the NTC podcast. This is episode 99. This is Aaron Washington, your host, coming back at you guys for another episode. Avi Tiagi joins me once again. We are glad to be back with you guys. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to join one of our episodes. This evening, we have the pleasure of welcoming in Coach Nick of B-Ball Breakdown. If you guys are involved in the basketball space in any capacity, you should know who this guy is. He's been making basketball breakdown videos for many years on YouTube. He does a lot of analysis on YouTube, on Twitter/X. If you guys are looking for really in-depth content for the basketball side from a coach's perspective, we highly recommend you check out his videos. So, Coach, I almost feel like this is we should have just waited one more week and brought you on for 100 for the century mark. But in any case, we're glad to have you on. Thanks so much for taking the time. We're really big fans of your videos and your content. You do such a great job in the space, just breaking down the game from the smallest details. So thanks again. And we're looking forward to this conversation.
Well, thanks for having me on. I feel honored, and that's very impressive, to stick with it and get to 100 episodes. Not a lot of people get there. So that's great to hear that. And I'm looking forward to seeing that one too.
Awesome. Well, we'll be right back there, guys, for in one more week or so. We'll get you 100. But in the meantime, for 99, we brought Coach in because Avi and I wanted to talk with him about a few trends that we're seeing in the NBA today. We really just want to break this down to, at the simplest point, the state of the NBA today. How is the game progressing? What are we noticing from the offensive, defensive ends? Is there anything we like to see changed? So basically what we want to talk with Coach about is those topics, just get his perspective on it, ask him a few questions, and really just kind of dive in to see where the game of the NBA is headed today. It's radically changed over the past 5 or 10 years. And we firmly believe that, it's just going to continue to evolve as players continue to evolve, strategies do the same. And we just want to really get into that here today with Coach. So let's get right into it. The first topic we really want to discuss with you, we have 3 this afternoon. The first of which is really how the game is officiated, how it's being called. So this segment it just boils down to just foul drawing, what NBA players are doing today to draw fouls. It is a skill. Not all players are able to do it at such a high level, but in any case, we see a lot of the elite players do this. So we see the Luka Doncic's able to get a lot of foul calls. Jimmy Butler is another great example. Trae Young, guys like that really draw fouls at a high level, and they just know how to use their bodies to just really get the referees, force them to make a call. And one name that I wanted to bring up here while we're discussing foul drawing, you actually did a video about him not too long ago. Is Joel Embiid. This is a player, Coach, you know this all too well. He gets so much scrutiny from the NBA fan base based on the way he draws fouls. He uses his body. You mentioned in one of your videos here that he kind of he has an awkward takeoff sometimes where he doesn't go into that 1-2 as many players do. You used Kevin Durant as a prime example. But he kind of goes off of that first step, goes into contact, gets people off balance, and they're not really expecting that. So that's one of the ways where he draws a lot of fouls. He's obviously, one of the tops in the free throw attempts this season. He's number 4 right now with 403 foul shots taken. And it would be more if he didn't miss so many games. So obviously he's one of the prime names up there. So first, just kind of want to ask you about what you're seeing from this perspective as far as what offensive players are doing to draw fouls. Do you think that offensive players are allowed to initiate maybe too much contact when they're going into defensive players? Are defensive players almost helpless sometimes when they're trying to keep guys like Embiid or Trae or Doncic out of the paint? We just want to get your perspective on that first when it comes to how the officiating of the game is going right now in the NBA.
Sure. Well, the one thing I want to make clear, I think, is that, this notion of being able to draw fouls is not new at all. We've had players from decades ago who would be able to draw fouls and they'd get hammered and they'd get to the free throw line just like they do now. So I don't want to make it seem like it's, this radical change. There's guys who were getting double-digit free throw attempts a game. We didn't have social media. We didn't have the video that you could look at, freeze frame and whatever. So I think that sort of skews some of this thing. But to get to the Embiid point, I think we have refined the skill of drawing fouls to some degree. And I think the biggest part, oh, there goes that thing. The biggest part is the way you can gather the ball and vary the gather when you pick the ball up off the dribble while you're driving to the basket. And it really should be lauded as a skill that you can throw the defense off by either going quickly as you plant the foot that you're going to jump off of. That is when you snatch the ball and you're going up, right? Which is quicker than a normal snatch the ball with one foot and then you take another step and jump off of that foot. Most of the defenders these days are timing it for that second step. So when you take off early, they're out of position. There is contact, and it's a foul. It's not even really. It's the easiest call the refs are going to make all night. So again, I don't think this is much of a trend per se, but you do see more of the guys who are going to the basket varying that gather, and that causes a lot more havoc. Now, in theory, the defense will get better, and they'll adjust, and they'll be able to time it or read it better and figure that out. I hope. For the sake of the offensive rating climb that we can't stop going up and up and up every year. But I think that's really the focus should be the defense and figuring out ways to be more present in the moment and not just assuming they're going to go 1-2 off into the layup.
On that front, I was actually thinking about this as well. In terms of foul drawing, over the course of the last 3-4 years, a lot of the common fouls that I don't want to pick names out, but it was really easy to think of. Booker and Lillard and Trae Young. Some of those stop fouls. Some of those just driving haphazardly into defenders, just swinging your arms around and getting the free throw line. They changed some of those rules to eliminate some of those, but it still feels like sometimes when you watch them, especially with big forwards, when you watched 5-10 years ago, I feel like there was more of an emphasis where they wouldn't necessarily call a foul on the defender if shoulder-to-shoulder contact was made, but the offensive player's shoulder just went straight into the defender middle of their chest. Whereas now it feels like that's more often called as a foul. Do you think that's something the league will focus on as a point of emphasis? And do you think that'll make a substantial difference going forward in terms of decreasing foul rates even more than they already have?
I mean, I hope so. I know 2 years ago when the season started, they really were not calling a lot of fouls going to the basket, and it felt a little bit more like the playoffs, but in the regular season. And I think everyone was kind of shocked in the beginning because they were going and there was no whistle. And we were like, oh, well, this is actually kind of nice. Like the game keeps going and moving. I don't know why they went away from that. I think everyone was really happy with how that was going, except for obviously the 10 or 12 guys that like to go to the basket a lot who were not getting those calls. But that's a simple adjustment. Now, the thing that seems to be triggering, and then I spend a lot of time on Twitter trying to help people, is with like the Embiid stuff. We just saw it with, maybe it was Curry got called for it, and maybe it was Pat Beverly who was going. And the problem here is that a lot of times, if you really know how to look at this footage and you understand like how the referees are processing the play, you can see that the defender is moving into the path of the offensive player. Now, when I show those people what a real veering off of your path as an offensive player into the defender and lowering your shoulder and all that stuff, when you see that happen, and then you compare it to what we're trying to help them understand with like the Pat Beverly or even the Embiid drives that we had earlier this year, you can see there's a vast difference. You know, Beverly was kind of bracing himself, going toward the basket, but stayed on his line toward the hoop. Curry was late getting there. His vector was right into the, perpendicular into the path, and then he runs into him. So if you were to, and then so that's one part of it where they have trouble sort of processing the vector of the defender. But when you know what you're looking for and you have enough experience, it's completely obvious. The other part though is that Beverly, as he snatches that ball on that one, goes to shoot like the floater. And a lot of people kind of want to say with really no credibility that he's not really trying to score. And I'm like, if you were to Photoshop the defender out and just watch him do this, all you would see is a guy who pulls up off of the 1 foot, jumps in the air, was square to the basket and shoots it. If he was turned the other way, like his back to the basket, he just throws the ball up over his head and goes over the backboard or something. That is no intention to score. That is somehow getting a foul, whatever. But these are all legitimate shots that could go in because they're just regular shots, and there would be virtually no way to legislate those out of the game because I don't know how the referees are going to have to say, oh, you can't jump off the one, you got to jump off the 1-2. Like I don't understand. That doesn't work. So it's a conundrum, but I certainly think that there might be a level of physicality that could be allowed that might clear some of this stuff up.
Exactly, Coach. That's a good explanation. And I'm glad you brought up the shot motion, the intention to score, because a lot of the debate that I see back and forth, whether it be on Twitter X or YouTube, is it a natural shooting motion? That's where a lot of the arguments come into play. And I think when people are talking about Embiid, they question that part of the equation when he's going to the basket. They're saying, is it a natural shooting motion? If he's going to his side and it just looks all awkward, like is that really in a shot attempt? And I see some people say like, well, it might depend on the player. Some players may attempt shots that others, can't necessarily do. So it could be a case by case basis. Like, that brings in another component of it that's challenging as well. So, is that something that you think is a problem at all, as far as like the just drawing fouls that are not natural shooting motions? Do referees need to buckle down that a little bit more?
I mean, certainly you probably shouldn't get the free throws, but that's what they legislated with the rip through fouls, where they don't give them the free throws now, because that's clearly not a shot. They've also gotten rid of the ones where if you haven't gathered the ball before the contact, and they don't give you a shooting foul, which you might get it in the bonus. But so they made those movements towards cleaning that up in a really positive way. I'm happy they did that. I just don't understand, like, when I see a player who is in the air, facing the basket, elbow underneath the ball, and a guide hand on the other side of the ball. Like, I don't understand how that isn't any other intention to score, whether he jumped when he was facing the baseline and then twists in the air. But that's the creativity and the jazz of basketball. So, I think that some of this stuff is rooted in the fandom of, cheering against certain teams and against certain players. And of course, they don't want those players to score on their favorite team. They don't want their team to lose. I get it, but these guys are really, really good, and that's kind of the development that we've gone to. And I would imagine we're going to see even more skill going forward, and probably even more ways we haven't even considered on ways to, if you don't want to call it drawing fouls, but ways to create shots that are really unique and we haven't really thought of, but you can make those. That's probably going to happen. I don't see why it wouldn't. And so if they're triggered now about some of these things that seem pretty basic ho-hum to me, then I worry about what's going to happen later when somebody uncorks. Like, I like to teach, I'm obsessed with a one-footed three-pointer, like a runner from the three-point line, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's going to continue to be more and more popular, but that's scratching the surface. Who knows? Like, there could be other ways to shoot that ball and get that shot off and do it nearer to the basket that we haven't even thought of yet. And that's exciting to me.
And to add on that point, actually, when I think about it anecdotally, a lot of the times when I see those criticisms leveled at players, most of the ones I've seen are against players like Embiid or against Doncic or against Shea, people who have these unorthodox pickups where, the way they're getting the ball off might be not what you're expecting, but that doesn't mean it's not a real shot attempt. It's just that the way they got into it was different from how you'd normally expect. So, I completely agree with everything you just said there.
Yeah, absolutely. And then that's what's so fun and unique about this game is people have different games, and it's really, really, really hard to guard them. But don't forget, like, people did this in the 90s and the 80s, and they would vary, they would also vary the gather. We'd see the Euro step coming in a little bit later in the late 80s, early 90s. And so even things like that are along the same lines of what we're seeing now, but just, it is more refined. It's more prevalent, I suppose. But, some of these guys, for whatever reason, are just making people really upset. And I would imagine over enough time, they'll calm down and realize, and I would hope appreciate some of the artistry we're seeing. But I get it. I don't see how you legislate that out of the game because then you're having to have the referee decide what like the intention of the player was versus what did the defensive player do? Did he run into him? Was there contact? Was it enough contact? Okay. That's really what they can handle live with these bodies that are moving so quickly across the court. So I think that they're doing okay. I think the one thing they could do is maybe adjust the amount of contact that merits a foul.
Exactly. One more point, Coach, on this before we move on. You see a lot when players will go to the FIBA game internationally that they do some of these same things they're doing in the NBA, and because it's called differently, they struggle a little bit. They don't get the same calls. You don't see as many fouls called, free throw attempts. Do you think it's just a fundamental difference in the way it's called? Is there any kind of something in the NBA game that needs to be changed closer to FIBA? Would you recommend that the NBA take some of those concepts? Or what do you think about that?
Well, the rule books are kind of similar, and they're moving closer and closer together. I think FIBA wants to be as close to the NBA, if not exactly like the NBA, as they move along. They added the gather step rule after the NBA made it official. But let's make one thing clear: is that the NBA had always called the game with a gather step, basically, and they just wanted to refine the rules so that it's really clear and everyone understands. But that's how everyone had been able to use the gather step since the 80s. But the point being that so those rule books are similar, but you're right. There is discretion. There is points of emphasis that the referees have in different leagues. There's no question that the Americans talk about how much more physical it is in FIBA, right? Yep. And there is a lot more allowed. So, it's probably akin to what the playoffs look like, right? Basically, you needed a comparison in the NBA. Sure. So, if the NBA shouldn't really have two sets of thresholds for what a foul is, right? When the playoffs start, when the regular season starts. So, in my mind, pick one, and I would say, pick the playoffs. Go with that. I liked it when it was like that a couple of years ago. So hopefully they'll look at that and remember what they said or what they did before that season 2 years ago to tell the refs, let them play a little bit more, let the offensive players adjust and figure out how to avoid some of the marginal contact stuff that they won't get called anymore, so that they're not stuck in the air and can't get close to the basket. So I think that would be the best case scenario.
Me too, for sure. So this is all kind of leading to a topic that we also see talked about a lot in the NBA space, Coach, and that would be just the offensive evolution of the game. You mentioned in many of your videos on YouTube that, we're seeing offensive efficiency rates year over year continue to climb. And, what you would see as a league leader 5 years ago might rank 25th this season, just because of the way it's trending upward. So I first just kind of wanted to ask you about, are we hitting an inflection point, a tipping point when it comes to the efficiency? I read a little piece from Michael Pino over at The Ringer. I think it was about 11 days ago. And he mentioned that the average offensive rating today is 116.3. So that's the highest that's been tracked ever since we had play-by-play data. And that's over 3 points per 100 possessions, up from just the 21-22 season. So this is something that's been climbing, every year, and it seems like it's growing more and more each year. So, with all the 3-pointers today, with the space of the game, the pace of the game, do you see this continuing over the next several years, or do you think we're hitting a point into which it levels at all, just because it's been climbing so much over the past several years? Like, do we hit a point where it eventually tails off, and we don't see the kind of growth that we've been seeing over the past 5 or so years?
Well, the interesting thing is, and another stat to give you is that the offensive rating, I think the top 5 rated offensive rating teams this year would all have an all-time offensive rating compared to what was last year. So every year, number one team offensive rating is the all-time highest we've ever seen. Yeah. Well, this year there's 5 teams higher than last year's all-time high. So, I think the question was what's the 3-point frequency going to get to? And it seems like it's leveled off because the Rockets were pushing the envelope here with a 50% frequency, which means, what's the percentage or the percentage of 3-point attempts versus the overall field goal attempt number. So, over half of their shots were threes. And I think it's kind of calmed down a little bit in terms of that, where we're settling into in the 40s. Everyone's in the 40s now. The thing that I have to check a little bit more, but I know up until recently, was that the 3-point field goal percentage hadn't really budged much on the average across all these years. So to me, it seems like there's a lot of opportunity there to figure out how to, to take better shots and make more of those across the board. Now, I bet you if you looked at it and parsed out the top shooting teams, we're probably seeing higher percentages from the guys who are really generating good shots and good looks. And what's weighting it down are the bad teams, right? The teams that don't have space and that don't have shooters. But again, that would be the area you look for to find a little bit more efficiency. But at some point, it gets maxed out without question. At some point, everybody's running the same offense. We're seeing very similar actions. It's not even just that we're not doing post-ups anymore because they're inefficient. And we can talk about why the erroneous thought process in 2004, 05, why that happened. But it's not even the fact that they're not posting up as much for shots. It's that they're moving that position completely. They're vacating that position. So now the basket area is open a lot more often, and guys can get into to that area without help. And there's a lot less help that way. Because if you watch the 80s, even if there's a guy in the weak side low block, which is a common place like the dunker spot, that means that man is also there to help and be in the way and clog the lane. And that doesn't happen as much. It's a lot harder. So But we're moving towards somewhere where I'm sure there's more to wring out of this, that we can keep going up without question. We're obviously closer to what the maximum is going to be at some point in the next 5-10 years than we were 20 years ago. But I think that there's still room. There's still room in the 3-point shot selection stuff. Because again, if you could take 50 threes and they were all good threes, then great. Take 50 good threes a game. You know what I mean? Like, that's great. But if 15 of them are really bad, highly contested, off the dribble with 10, 12 seconds on the shot clock, if we can get better at getting rid of those, then you'll see it get even higher efficiency.
Yeah, I totally agree. It feels like when watching the game, teams have not just learned to take more threes. I think over the last 5 years, actually, teams have stabilized on average at taking around 34 to 35 threes a game. But it's like I think now they're finally maximizing how they can use all that space, as you're saying. The fact that you almost always have 5-out spacing. You'll do 4-out, 1-in sometimes, but there's a lot of teams that can run that 5-out spacing, and everyone is a credible shooter you don't want to leave. So teams have gotten really good at driving to the hoop. I believe drives are up across the league per team by about 50% over the last 5 years, just because teams have gotten so much better at optimizing for finding ball handlers. There's less players like Al-Farouq Aminu on the Trailblazers. I remember when they made the conference finals 5 years ago, where you give him the ball and he can't really drive to the hoop. He can shoot threes sometimes if he's open, but he can't really drive. There's less of those now on those championship and playoff level teams. So yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem like it's going to
flaming on my bingo card for today. Is it going after him? Wow, impressive. Good.
Oh, I don't mean to go after him. He was just a good example. He was a great player in his time. It's just like it seems like more and more with the skill development, there are more players coming into the league who are more prepared to be able to do the pass, dribble, or shoot from three. So I feel like maybe it'll just keep progressing for a little bit longer. It feels like, though, if everything has already started to stabilize, once driving rates start to stabilize, would we then maybe reach a point where it just offensive rating just stays still at like maybe 118 or 119 league wide?
Yeah, I mean, I would bet it's going to what's the maximum we are going to ultimately end up seeing, right? That might be a good question, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's at what, 120 this year? What was this year? 23, 24 is the number one team right now is Indiana still at 120.8. I bet you it'll get to 125. I don't know. I'm kind of making this up, but I bet you there can be a progression there over the next few years. But you're right. At some point, the math just I don't think you can get any more efficient than that. And then part of what that looks like, we just saw Julius Randle. Somebody posted his shot, chart over from 2 years ago till now, and it's like, 2 years ago it was just filled with mid range, and now it really isn't. And if he's the guy who's not taking mid range, and we're really refining this threes and layups, and that's it, or in the paint shots. The other thing though is and I know like Drew Hanlon always yells at me for this when I say that the triple threat is dead. But the reason why drives are up and why players are getting better and better at drives is that we've learned how to attack on the catch. So as the ball is swung to you and you split your feet and you go right away, the defense can't catch up. And I've been teaching that for a decade, maybe longer. And it's now, every NBA player does this and knows how to do it. And by the way, the WNBA and the women's college game, like they're slower to pick that up. And I think it's going to slowly start to permeate there. And then you're going to see higher efficiency of the women's game too. I think slowly but surely better training methods are going to be introduced, because it's right now they're very far behind. And that's good, because they deserve to have a bigger crowd, and they'll have a bigger crowd when the skill level improves. But getting back to the point about splitting and going. So basically, the rule is the ball's in the air, you're in the air, and then you split your feet as you're catching the ball, and then you explode right away. There's no reason to catch the ball, rip through, triple threat, wait and read the defense after you catch it. We want you to read the defense before you catch it, which is radical. That's probably the biggest difference when you're talking about sort of individual skill development from like 1980 till now. Everybody would have told you got to catch the ball, rip through to your waist. Look, where's the defense? What are they doing? Well, now you do all that looking and reading before, and so we can make that quick decision, because how I always teach it is you're never more open than when you catch the ball. And I usually, I don't want to blow the players' minds I'm working with, depending on what age they are. But usually I say, okay, now why is that true? And they kind of figure it out. It's that, yes, as soon as you touch that ball, the defense is just coming right at you closer and closer every millisecond that goes by. Why would you triple thread and wait to let them catch up? That doesn't make any sense to me. So that's a really big difference right now. And as everyone's getting good at doing that, then that's why you're gonna see, you don't have it anymore. Alfred Caminos, you don't have even like guys like Jay Crowder, like he's still like that. He won't put the ball on the ground. And so you'll still have it. You'll still have one guy on the floor at any one time that's not really good at driving, right? And that's okay. But eventually here's what you're gonna see in the future. 5 40% three-point shooters and 5 guys who can put the ball on the ground, right? And probably 5 guys who can pass. So it's basically what Pat Riley had envisioned at one point with like 5 Magic Johnsons out there, although better shooting Magic Johnsons. Now, when that happens, the game will not resemble what we watch today.
Yep, Coach, I'm glad you brought up all those points. It's funny you mentioned the attack off the catch and just how it's so quick, because Avi and I have been gathering clips over the past few days. We've been talking about the PJ Washington trade for Dallas. And in several of the clips that we gathered, both before the trade and after the trade, in that first game against OKC, you saw him do exactly that, where the ball gets, Luka gets into the paint or whoever has the ball, drive and kick. The defense is in rotation. It works its way out to PJ, whoever that is, and they just catch and go straight to the basket. And then they get a quality look from either somewhere in the mid range or right at the rim. And that just happened time and time again. And another trend I've also noticed that kind of fits right in is the stampeding. I don't know if you call it that or you have another name for it, but essentially when the ball is coming to an offensive player, they are moving to the ball. So they have a momentum going when the defense is closing out and they have another advantage. So yeah, seeing that all the time. And I think it's a product of the evolved game to where it's inside out. You want to draw the defense in. You have a Luka type presence. You have a Shea. You have somebody like Embiid, and you're just forcing the defense to move. And you have that 5 out, somebody like a Boston. You'll see them do this all the time towards swings. And, there's advantages created. And it really just comes down to teams having a player that can take advantage of the space. The other player that we gathered clips on before they had BJ Washington was Grant Williams. And we had a side-by-side. The first clip was Grant Williams, and he got the ball in the same situation as BJ Washington did. And he kind of got his feet tangled up a little bit when he was, getting ready to go to the basket. He traveled on the play. It was a turnover. And then with BJ Washington, he's a little more adept at attacking off the drive and really forcing attention. And he was able to do that at a high level. And I think that's just going to expand the game for Dallas in a big way. Their offense is even more dangerous because they have players that can work like that are not just the 3-point specialists. They can work inside and out. So I think that's a huge development for a team like them.
For sure. And then Daniel Gafford being able to do the Lively role until Lively gets back. And then when they have him in there, I wonder, maybe they can play him together. I don't know. It's good. The Mavericks got better, right? Now, I don't know if they got good enough, but, if the goal is to get better, and whether or not it's an inch or a mile, they got better. And that was really good to see. And it's good to see, maybe PJ Washington rescued a little bit and let's see him on a good team and find out what he really can do. I like to see that Gafford as well. So I'm anxious to see how that plays out.
The ideal team you described like a few minutes ago actually made me chuckle a little, because it reminded me that, the OKC Thunder. I've watched some of those lineups, and they actually some of them describe the perfect vision of a team that you had just described as the ideal future for the NBA. So that made me laugh a little, especially because they're so much younger than the rest of the league. So it would track that maybe in terms of player development, all of their players are better set up to take advantage of all of those skills than maybe some of the older players within the league.
I mean, heck, if they could get Giddey to shoot better from 3-point land, and he's tall enough, he is in that realm. And it's an interesting thing about Australian players, because a lot of them come into the league and they can't shoot threes. And but part of that, I believe, is that there's still a strict adherence to being square to the basket when they're teaching kids in Australia how to shoot, which is not how any of the great shooters of all time ever did it. They all had a turn to allow with their feet to allow the shooting hip and shooting elbow to be in line with the basket. And then no dip. I think they also teach no dip when you catch the ball and shoot it, which is an extreme rhythm problem where you have to dip, and every once in a while you'll see Clay not dip it or Duncan Robinson once every 10 games, and they make 25% of those, so
Right.
Someone else is doing it now. I just saw a couple times in a week they did it. But don't forget, the no dip stuff, it requires the perfect pass that has to be right at their nose, basically, to be able to do that. So
Exactly.
anyway, I would like to get down to Australia and show them a couple of the modern methods that we've developed recently to really help unlock a lot of shooting. But without question, yeah, I mean, like once you can do that, the way you would attack and the way you would space the floor changes everything. And now all of a sudden you cannot help, basically, when you have something like that. So I think that would, it would be radical. And there's no question it will happen. Guys like Chet Holmgren and Wembanyama, who can shoot and handle the ball, if once you have that position, the tallest guy position, filled with that, it's easy to find everybody else who can be in that 6'6", 7', 6'9" range, and do all those things as well.
Absolutely, Coach. I feel like it just wouldn't be right to talk about all the offense in today's game without going into depth of the defense in today's game as well. The two go hand in hand. And I really wanted to bring this up with you, Coach, because you had a recent video and some messages on Twitter X where you were talking about a new defensive method that you worked on, and you had a whole video about this, and really just taking concepts from prior coaches, from the past, and also some new concepts that have been introduced here recently. So in today's game in the NBA can really at times seem like it's almost impossible to stop the offense, especially when you're playing against teams like Boston or OKC. There's 5-out spacing. Everybody can pass and shoot. It's like, how do you really slow down a team like that? And I first wanted to just really bring up that video that you put up, because it was really interesting. Avi and I both found it very interesting, to where it's basically you're taking that player, and instead of playing a conventional defense to where you're playing them straight up, you bring that player behind them to eliminate the pick and rolls and eliminate those 3-point attempts that we were just talking about earlier. So now you're forcing more mid-range shots and more of the inefficient shots in the NBA. So I guess just to kind of start it, how did you really just come up with that? Were you just in the lab one day just cooking stuff up and all the pieces came together? Were you watching film of the 2019 Rockets and how they defended James Harden, and it came to you like just the light bulb went off? What was the big motivator for a defensive strategy like that?
Yeah, I mean, basically what it was, this is even 5 years ago, the offensive rating was inexorably going up and up and up. Imagine, I didn't even think about what it'd be like now, but it kept doing that. So it said to me that what we were doing traditionally around defense doesn't work. It simply does not work. Step sliding, choppy step closeouts, all the garbage that we've been teaching fundamentally for defense for 100 years is ineffective at the highest level, and will continue to be more or less and less effective in the lower levels too, because they're getting better too. So I thought to myself, once you start with that premise, then you're like, okay, what can you do? What's the most radical version of defense that would be better or different than what we're doing now? And, the thought popped in my head, well, how about playing behind the ball? So I was like, okay, well, now what? And I started trying to figure out, well, okay, this is probably going to be a zone. So, okay. And then I started trying to develop my own zone. And that's kind of crazy because there's what, like 5 or 6 different zones. And the thing is, it's a rectangular shaped court. They've kind of figured out that there's only a finite amount of, alignments you can have. And I was a amoeba defense coach, 1-1-3. Obviously everyone knows 2-3 and 3-2, all these different ones. So I started to develop my own, and I would get people in the gym, high level players, and just run through stuff and just try it. Let's figure this out. I also remembered that the Jazz guarded Harden 3/4, not quite all the way behind like a caboose, but almost behind him. And I think they took 10 points per game off of his average in that series, and they didn't win the series, but they limited his output quite a bit. And so at that point, I was like, well, when you play drop coverage and the guard chases the ball handler around the screen, and the screener's man drops, in between the ball and the basket, it's kind of like what I was doing anyway. You're already behind the basketball and you're guarding it from that position. So it's not even that radical in a pick and roll setting. So at that point, I was pushing it, trying to find it. It was working. It wasn't working. It was okay. It wasn't great. And then finally, there was just a couple of rotations that we were having trouble as we almost got it locked in. And I finally pulled apart, and I remember that I had used Dean Smith's point zone, which is a unique zone that looks a little bit like a 1-3-1 when you line up, but it does not behave like a 1-3-1, and it covers the corners really well. And so that was what I was getting. We were getting hurt at the most that I was concerned about. So I decided, let's take the template of the point zone and play behind the ball. it's not that easy because you have to teach individually how to play behind the ball. There are no skills. Nobody has these skills. Nobody knows. The one guy that you probably play against in pickup who's awesome at reaching around when you get by him on the dribble and knocking it away from behind, and that guy's probably not very good. He doesn't have long arms, isn't quick, but always can do that. If you don't switch hands quickly enough, boom, they're knocking it away into a steal. So we studied that. Like, how did that guy do it? Why is he so good at doing that? And we came up with some ideas to figure that out, because now you don't have to shrug and say, we're lucky we have that guy. Or, by the way, most of those guys would get benched. They wouldn't even dare try it. So a lot of times if you might want to go zone to hide a bad defender, what if it turns out that bad defender is awesome at the reach around steal and would never dare do it, but now is your best defender in this defense, right? And so suddenly you would never have known that if you weren't out of the box enough. So anyway, I did that the video, and I've probably done 50, 60 Zooms with coaches all around the world who are playing it and putting it in. And it's working. It's causing a lot of havoc. No one is used to doing this. They don't know how to deal with pressure from behind like that. And I think it could very well be the next level. If you watched the Heat last night, I got to go through a little bit more carefully. But a couple people, somebody sent me over some clips, and it's possible that they're running it now, and I know that they're aware of it. So, which is cool, right? It would have been nice if they would have said, hey, thanks, we're going to use this. But either way, I'll take it if it is. But I got to really look at it closely. But don't forget, in my video that I did show, I actually use some of their 2-3 alignment, where if you remember in the finals last year, Lowry and Robinson, who are the forwards in a 2-3, are facing the basket out near the 3-point line. And that's a really radical shift, but it really helps to see the floor. So no longer are you having to deal with cutters that you can't see or can't hear the call out because it's so loud in the gym. And it makes it hard to set pin downs on those guys or flare screens because you're facing and you see everything in front of you. So anyway, it's a radical thing to some degree, but it's not that radical when you kind of break it down. And all I can tell you is that it creates so much havoc. And if you were to run it even in practice, and not just, let's just say you didn't run it in games, so you just use it as a tool in practice, it's going to make your offense so much better because of the new ways of having to deal with pressure that playing in front of the ball will seem easy compared to that.
Well, I guess speaking of keeping people on their toes, just off the cuff here, I wanted to ask you this question. So suppose NBA teams as a whole all started implementing this as a staple factor of their defense. Which teams do you think would currently do you think would be able to run it best, and which team do you think would be hurt the most by facing this sort of defense?
Well, I interviewed Jose Alvarado the other day for the Pelicans, and he would be awesome at playing behind the ball without question.
Yeah.
And we have guys too who could sink and fill because you don't need the center is just between the ball and the basket like a windshield wiper, right? He just stays between the ball. It's really easy to play. If you're big and oafy and you can't move, great. So it's great for that. But by the way, if you ended up going like Draymond Green, there's some fun things we can open up and have him actually close out to the corners a little bit and do some other things, which would really be awesome as well. So the Warriors would probably be really good at that too. We got long like Wiggins and Kuminga and Draymond. That would be really fun. Yep. The Pelicans without question. I think the Heat, as far as teaching goes, they would probably be the best at it too, because Spoelstra really knows how to teach and implement stuff and get the most out of his players. So, I mean, I'm sure I'm missing a few others, but, again, you'd want that really pesky Alvarado style guard on top. You'd want, the power forward guys got to be really like a Draymond Green. You need that. And then it's awesome when you have the wings who are long and quick. So if you have a couple of those guys too, I imagine it's also like the Clippers, if you have to have Kawhi and Paul George on the wings and, I mean, listen, even Russ is playing like, energetic defense in this 20 minutes a game, Terrence Mann, would probably be pretty good at that too. And then, Zubats would be great in the 5. So, I mean, again, it's only a matter. I mean, I don't know if it's a matter of time. We'll have to see because NBA teams won't do it until like a Division I team ran it. Mm-hmm. And I had a Division I team run it in one game for a few possessions last year. And now I've got a Division II team running it right now. And it's working really well. So, I think maybe this year was Division II. I want to try and get a Division I team for next year and then the NBA the year after that, unless I can somehow convince, there's some Cowboys out there who are crazy. But most of the guys in the NBA, they're a little bit in the box and rightfully so. It's a high pressure situation. You don't want to go too crazy when in that setting. But there's no question we're seeing more and more of defenses like getting behind the ball. And it's interesting. Now, the only thing I want to bring up, I know I'm talking a lot, but I'll just throw this out there.
No, that's fine.
You said, well, what if let's just say a whole bunch of teams start running it? Mm-hmm. How do you maintain the advantage? Because every team's now used to this, right? If they're playing against it in practice. Mm-hmm. So the answer is you can jump behind the ball whenever you want. So imagine playing in front of 3 people and jumping behind 2, or you're in front of the guy to start the touch, and then halfway through you jump behind him, right? After the 3rd pass, you jump behind the ball. So you can now randomize when you jump behind the ball and when you stay in front, to the point where the offense will just have no idea when you're going to do it or what you're doing. And even some of the teams that don't get all the way behind are driving me nuts because they don't get all the way behind, but they'll be like next to the player with the ball on the wing. But there's a center in front. So they can't just go to the basket, but they get confused and they freeze, which is great. Like, freezing is good. Confusion is awesome. So it works anyway, even if you're not behind the ball reaching and causing havoc. But the whole point is once you develop those skills of having a hand on the lower back of the ball handler, because most of the refs I've talked to will allow that. It's not a hand check because you're not impeding progress. And as long as you're not slowing the guy down. So, what you're doing is eliminating off the dribble threes, because no one's going to shoot a 3 with somebody breathing down their neck off the dribble. You can't set a ball screen because there's no angle to set a ball screen on the guy behind the ball. So you're eliminating ball screens basically. And the way we close out to get behind is basically very similar to running teams off of the line anyway. So you're effectively eliminating, or not eliminating, but limiting 3-point shots severely, and you're eliminating pick and roll basically. That is probably the best part of the defense.
For sure. So I'll just wrap this up with one more question. It's kind of like 2 parts to it. So really the first part of it comes down to situation. I know with zone a lot in NBA, especially with the Heat that run it a lot, it's not something they're going to throw out there for an entire game. It's very situational. It's in spurts. They'll toggle between man and zone a lot during the game. So Avi and I kind of were in agreement that we were just thinking that a defense like this, kind of like zone, would be good in situations as far as just, bringing it out every now and then to kind of mix up coverages. So want to ask you if you believe that this defense should be used in a similar fashion to where it's more situational and in spurts. And then also with that, if it's situational, what would you do in a situation if you're playing a team like Phoenix? And I know this is very extreme and most teams aren't like this, but they have 2 players, really 3 almost, that actually like to operate in the mid-range with the big 3 of Beal, KD, and Booker. And this defense encourages those types of shots to where they actually like to operate. So would you actually use that defense in a situation like that? Do you think it would be effective, or how would you deal with that?
Right. That's a great question. And because the goal of it is, it's called the chase defense because we want to chase you inside the 3-point line. And all we want is a hand up on those mid-range shots, right? Now, I've always envisioned this as a thing you'd run, 12, 14 times a game, just as a regular zone to change the tempo and everything like that. But I was telling a lot of people in the high school level, and even some of the college people too, I'm like, listen, you'll probably, you play the 12 times a game, but there will be games, I suspect, where you'll be able to play it 15 times in a row, and the team just never solves it, right? So that's one of the way you do it, because I don't know if you can have it as a base defense when you run it all the time. Maybe, but I don't know. Maybe I think the teams will get used to it at some point. Now, the Phoenix conundrum, and it's also the CP3 conundrum, because you're going to let a Luka come down the floor and dictate without. Now, you'd have to have ultimate pressure from behind. It's not that the problem that some coaches had was they just must have assumed that the guy behind the ball doesn't do anything. When in fact, the way we're teaching is they're reaching, but from behind the entire time, and they're causing all that havoc and all that pressure. So it really has to be there. Now, even if so, like Kevin Durant, I think 1 year shot like 55% from between 15 and 19 feet, which is like so much higher than anybody will ever normally do. Last year, Clay was like 44% or 43%. Steph was 44, 45 from 15 to 19 feet. So even the greatest shooters, if you can get a hand up, a reasonable hand up, probably won't get really close to 50, right? They'll probably be in the mid 40s. So that means that you just need to shoot like 33% from 3 to get out, be ahead in that equation, right? If you're going to match, possession by possession. So I still think it's okay. It's still better than them taking threes and spreading the floor, getting dunks, right? It's still better no matter what. Now, obviously, if they hit, and that's the other thing is some coaches will be like, it didn't work. They got 2 threes and a layup. I was like, okay, well, let me look. And I look, okay, they got 2 wide open threes and they got a layup out of 14 possessions. So that's 8 points in 14 possessions, which would be the most elite defensive points per possession you're ever going to see. But it feels bad because those 3 possessions were really, really good shots, right? But you have to be able to stick with it and realize in the macro sense, overall, you will come out ahead. And again, if not, and the game's getting away from you, then yes, do your coaching thing, which is adjust and change the defense and whatever. But I think that's less of an issue than I feel like some coaches who don't have they just can't quite envision it, and so they just quickly poo-poo it. But I think the math is in my favor.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, totally agree. The last point, actually, probably before we wrap it up.
I got a couple more minutes if you want to go a couple more minutes.
Oh, okay. The more I was thinking about this defense and if it got incorporated as being like a changeup every once in a while, I think the biggest difference I was thinking was I think it would further polarize NBA offenses, where I feel like the worst NBA offenses would struggle against it much more than the best NBA offenses would. So I was actually thinking that overall, while it might decrease offensive efficiency just because it might be so effective and teams will struggle to adapt to it, it seemed to me like the best stars, the most skillful stars, would actually have a better time of being able to deal with and to pass out of it and to find reads out of it than teams like a month or two ago. I watched a lot of Pistons because we had a conversation about the Pistons, and that was the first thing that came to my mind when I was preparing for this podcast, just thinking about how they might struggle to deal with this sort of defense, and that would further separate the best teams from the worst teams and maybe promote some competitive super teams, honestly.
Interesting. I mean, put it this way. Some coaches ask me, like, what if you drive and kick and skip and then pass? And I'm like, well, if a team does that in an offensive possession, you're going to get scored on no matter what you're playing.
Exactly.
Right. And if that happens and they're that disciplined and really to do that, then okay, then you might have to do something different. But you have to remember, because we're in chase mode and we're getting behind the ball, you're probably not going to see a possession like that, because at some point in the middle of that, sounds like a glorious amount of ball movement, someone's going to take the bait and start driving. And generally, that person will you have a good chance that they're not going to be great at driving, right? Even today in the NBA, most teams, there's going to be at least, I would say there's probably 2 players on the other team when you're guarding them who aren't like amazing at driving. And they're going to take the bait thinking, oh, I'm open, and then realize a dribble and a half into that drive that this is a really bad idea. I'm going to get it back tapped. I'm going to throw the ball away. I'm going to take a bad shot. It's going to get deflected. All those things come into play, like that Jay Crowder's out there. We want those guys to start driving. It's not enough to just like run at them and close out. We want to make them playmakers. And so that's where I think there's a lot of malleability here, where you can, okay, fine, play normal against the Booker and Durant, and get behind everybody else. You know what I mean? Like that's where I think you can still find, ways to tweak it in game where you don't have to abandon it and just sort of throw your hands up and say it doesn't work. But it does require imagination and some ability to process quickly. And not every coach can do that. I totally get that. Not every coach is a great teacher, so it's like sometimes I do an hour-long Zoom. I explain exactly how to install it, and they go out and try and do it, and it doesn't really work. And sometimes you hear the reasons, and you're wondering, well, it sounds a little bit like there's a teaching deficit here, because that shouldn't be the issue, but it is, and so it happens at every level. So I think that it's all on the table, and I just need more data as it is anyway. So this is a big year. We have a lot of people running it, and we're going to be able to, next few weeks, as all the seasons are ending in the high school level and college, start to be able to amass all the footage together and really pull it apart and find out what's working, what's not, and make it better for next year.
Coach, can't wait to see how that breaks down, how it works out for everybody once they really start using it on a regular basis. And it just really seems like it's going to be an effective defense, because you're encouraging shot types that are least efficient. And you spoke about this in your video. You take away all the handoff actions and the spot up actions and the cuts, and you encourage the isolations. And that's, probably if you go back and look at play-by-play data with Synergy, you're going to find that that's more than often the least efficient or one of the least efficient shots to take as far as in the game.
And the last point I'll make is that for 100 years, we taught defense to limit athletic ability, step sliding, choppy step closeouts. There's a reason why players hate playing defense. It's because I think they understand intrinsically that this is limiting their ability to move, and they hate it because of that. And they don't feel like they're as good as they could be on that end because of that. With this defense, we are running everywhere, right? And when the havoc starts to get caused and they can see and they can feed off of that, that's even more exciting. So the anecdote I tell is that one of the teams I was working with on a college level, it was like we had gone hard for 2 straight hours in the practice, full court, half court, all defense. And the way I was coaching it was we were getting excited whenever we were cheering them, whenever they got behind successfully. And when they were able to get a hand up on the mid range, I didn't care if it went in or not. I just wanted a hand up on the mid range, hand up on the floater. That's all. And after 2 hours of really going hard, and it was a Thursday night, which is the night, the college kids, they all want to go out on Thursday nights. That's the big night, right? 8 o'clock at night, we blow the whistle, they wrap it up. And they literally all said to us, Coach, we want to keep doing this. And the head coach and I looked at each other and like, great, okay, we'll keep doing it. So we kept running it for another 20 minutes after that, at least, maybe longer. And I think that you can almost change the culture of defense, take away the anger, take away the disgust, take away the ego of all those things about, this is my man, how dare you get by me? Or the coach is like, how dare you let him get by you? That's an insult to your manhood, all that kind of BS. So I think that we could get away from that, tap into a whole different mindset. It could probably bleed into the man-to-man in your other zones too. But in what world can you imagine a college team that had gone so hard only on defense for 2 hours want to continue to do that? I think that spoke volumes to me, and that's what another exciting part of this whole thing.
100%. The intangibles, I think, are going to be really impactful. Like you said, it really kind of changes the equation from every possible scenario. So I love that, Coach. So we'll let you go, but we thank you so much for taking the time to join us. This is a great conversation. It just seems like every time, whether you're making a YouTube video or we speak to you in person or things like that, you really just pick up nuggets about the game that we can take with us in future discourse and while we're watching. So thanks so much, and just keep up the great work at B-Ball Breakdown. We love what you're doing.
Well, thanks. I mean, if you can't tell, I'm into basketball, and I feel pretty strongly about it. So any chance to get to talk about it with anybody, especially you guys, has been great. I really appreciate the conversation and letting me talk about this defense for sure. I really appreciate that. And for sure, let's do it again.
Absolutely. So, guys, if you're looking for more content just like this, more interviews with great personalities like Coach Nick, you can go to notradeclause.com. We have all our podcast and cap sheets and draft capital for you guys there. No Trade Clause on Instagram. No Trade_Clause on Twitter. That's where all of our content will be, and we hope you will check that out. And we hope you will join us for the next installment of the podcast, episode number 100. You don't want to miss it, guys. It's going to be a big one. So we'll see you next time. And in the meantime, just keep enjoying this basketball and have a great rest of your day. See ya.